So unless you really understand what value is and you've got that defined and communicated, you'll always get sucked into busy work. And as more and more work comes on, it's very easy to say, I can't take on any more. But you don't have a basis for working out which things to drop or put on the back burner because you haven't got this concept of relative value between the things that are being done. Hey, and welcome back to the mic. Great to have you on another Q&A episode.
Thank you so much for having me back. We are back in the Acast studio, which you know we love. I get to see you while I ask you these questions. And today we are covering value and strategy and a whole bunch of fun stuff that we've been talking about over the last couple of months. So can you just give us a bit of an overview on what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, we're going to talk about really creating more value for your organization, particularly that strategic approach of how do you know when you're doing the right things or not? And we get questions like this all the time because it's very easy to say superficially, come on team, create me some value. We're only going to do the things that create value. But the implementation of that is way harder than it sounds. And it's much more sophisticated than just saying, okie doke, go and get me some value, guys.
Yeah, and I think it can be incredibly difficult, I know as a CEO and a business owner, balancing the daily activities with that long-term strategic focus. And so, you know, we can talk a little bit about that.
Totally.
Let's start with why so many leaders get caught up in the daily activities at the expense of strategy.
I think most organizations see strategy as an event. So they'll have an annual planning process.
Yeah.
The senior management team will do some work. They'll come up with a draft strategy. They'll go up to the board for approval. And then all of a sudden they come back and say, here's our new strategy. Right? Now, it might just be a refresh. They're normally, 3 to 5 year strategies. It might just be a refresh that says, here we go again. And now we use this to develop our operating plans for this coming year. Unfortunately, unless you use a zero-based approach, you're always going to have difficulty matching the strategy to the work program. And when I say a zero-based approach, I mean starting with a blank sheet of paper. Most budgeting processes, which are probably the enemy of good strategic planning, simply take what we did last year, the things that we know we're going to continue doing, and let's throw some other stuff on top, which unrealistically is never going to get done because of the fact that there aren't resources to do it.
Yeah.
So this is the problem that we have, is that we tend to repeat regardless of whether or not value is coming out the back end. People get really comfortable, doing the same thing over and over and knowing that they have predictability and consistency in their jobs. And it's hard to break out of that.
Okay, so how does simplicity and focus come into this? Because we say a lot of the time, you have to have simplicity and focus in your work program, but as a, busy business owner, I can personally find that really difficult to get that simplicity and focus.
Yeah, and I think the underlying foundation for simplicity and focus is making sure that you understand what the most important things are. At any given point in time, how can I best apply the resources that I have at my disposal? How can I best apply them to get the maximum output, the most valuable results, and the greatest value for what we're trying to do? So unless you really understand what value is and you've got that defined and communicated, you'll always get sucked into busy work. And as more and more work comes on, it's very easy to say, I can't take on any more. But you don't have a basis for working out which things to drop or put on the back burner because you haven't got this concept of relative value between the things that are being done.
Okay, so talk to me about how focusing on the right things can multiply the value that an organization gets.
Yeah, I think the value multiplier concept comes from the fact that not all things are equal. There are some things that are going to deliver extraordinary value and some things that aren't. Now, one of the subtleties here is that sometimes incredibly repetitive tasks that seem mundane are part of a bigger piece of the puzzle that actually generate a lot of value. Imagine if you're producing products that require a high level of technical expertise and engineering. There will be elements to that production that are boring, mundane, and seemingly low-skilled.
Yeah.
But they're critical in the production of the eventual product, which might be the best thing a customer's ever seen and they're willing to pay a lot of money for it. So understanding not just the value output, but all of the things that contribute to that will tell you where you need to apply your resources.
Marty, I'd love for you to introduce the productive times effective equation.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. The way I like to think about this stuff is how productive are we as an organisation and in our teams? And that comes down to leadership. Leadership is all about focusing people on doing the right things the right way, the best they can. And then there's effectiveness. What are we actually doing? And if we achieve that, does that give us the outcome we need? So there's this effective versus productive thing I've always had in my head. So when I think about productive and effective, I think about it in percentage terms, right? So could we ever be 100% productive and 100% effective? Probably not. So we've got to aspire to be as close as we can. So let's say we've got our team really humming. They're working really well. They're achieving goals. They're stretching themselves individually and collectively. We might get to 85 or 90% productive, right, in that team because we're just humming, right? By the same token, let's look at what we're doing. Is the work program allowing us to work on the right things that create maximum value? If it's not, all of that good productive work might only be 40% effective. So if we're 40% effective and 90% productive, we multiply those together, we're only at 36% of our potential output overall. The ultimate best case scenario, right? If we can get to 80% productive and 80% effective, so 80% of the stuff we work on is dead smack bang in the value lane, then we're 64% of our potential maximum result. So I just like to think of it in percentage terms to see where that puts us. Now, if you improve either of those levers, the productivity of the team, how much they get through and how well they do that, and the things they're delivering, what they're actually working on, you can raise the standard of output and results that you get unbelievably by an order of magnitude. Like it can absolutely change the way your team delivers. If you were to ask me what most organisations do, on average at a team level, I'd say they're probably no more than 60 to 65% productive and probably no more than 60% effective. So, let's say they were 30 to 35% of their potential output. So a lot of the leadership stuff, I know I've been talking for a while then, but this is awesome. I get on a roll with this, right? A lot of the leadership stuff is trying to get that number up. How can we become more effective and productive to produce much better results?
I am obsessed with this concept.
That's good, isn't it?
It's so good. And I need to go away and do our numbers. So look, I just want to switch gears a little bit because people talk, like we're talking about strategy and people talk a lot about high performance strategy. Why is it so crucial to be able to understand what constitutes as, this high performance strategy and then actually be able to, make a high performance strategy and execute on it?
I think one of the greatest inhibitors to developing high performance strategy is that, I hesitate to say that, but I think that probably the majority of leaders don't understand what strategy is and how to use it. And, you bring consultants in and they sort of don't illuminate the situation anymore. They'll bring you in a bunch of PowerPoint decks and they'll shoehorn your business into the models they've got to develop a strategy that looks great on glossy paper and PowerPoint slides, and you can present to the board and everyone's happy. And then you go away and you do the same shit you did last year, right? This is a never-ending cycle. So when it comes to developing high-performance strategy, you've really got to understand the value drivers in your team. Now, as you know, we're developing strategy beyond the theory at the moment with my great colleague Andrew McDonald, one of the best strategy guys I've ever run into. He's dead set genius with this stuff. And some of his insights about his experiences with strategy, particularly in larger organisations, are phenomenal. So a lot of organisations will say, we have to grow. Yet they'll grow a product that isn't profitable. It's not earning its cost of capital. So if you grow a product that doesn't do that, then you're actually destroying organisational value. But growth is good, right? You know the way people talk about, revenue, Revenue is all about ego, right? So you can say how big your company is. It's a revenue size. Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash flow is reality. Just ask any small business owner.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so as business owners and leaders, how can we make sure that our strategies are focusing on creating real value, the things that are actually going to make a difference and move the company forward?
So I think the biggest thing is to make sure that you understand what value is. And product strategy is the value engine of any business. So if you have products that meet a customer need and that you can actually deliver those in a way that gives the customers the features and benefits they want for the right price, then you're going to do okay. But it all starts at product. So having the right product strategy is absolutely critical. In organizations that have multiple products, then you've got to optimize those moving parts. So you want to make sure you're investing appropriately in those products that are going to be growing and growing profitably and those that aren't, and to know the difference and to be ruthless about it. Most leaders in pretty much every organization I've ever seen do get emotionally attached to things when they've had an idea about, a new product, or they have a particular bias against a product, that they will make decisions that aren't necessarily purely rational because of those biases. So it's really important that we take a rational look of which products drive which value for which customer sets.
And while you're talking through that, I'm just thinking, do you have any tips on, say you can set that all correctly, do you have any tips on how to actually maintain that focus throughout the year? Because I think that's where a lot of people get caught. As you said, the strategy sounds all good and presented to board and everyone's happy, but how can you really make sure that that strategy is maintained throughout and it's not just something that's forgotten about after the first quarter?
Well, normally it's forgotten about before the end of the first quarter. Right?
Yeah.
What happens is the strategy
I was
is,
being optimistic.
I know. Normally what happens is strategy is then deconstructed into tactical plans and operating plans. So the tactical plan might be the 3-year window where you say, okay, to achieve these growth targets, we'll have to look at maybe some small company acquisitions during that time. And so that's sort of a mud map for how you might reach your growth targets for the strategic limits of your plan. But when it comes to the day-to-day stuff, the behavior is incredible, right, when you come down to budget time. The strategy comes down from the top. People have to set budgets, and they want to do the work that they like doing, and they want to keep doing the work that's already underway. And so they find a way to shoehorn the stuff that's already being done into the strategic objectives. So let's say one of my tasks is create a new software product for my customers in underground mining, right? And I'm going to create a new product for them. And then the company comes down and says, right, our strategy is to get out of software development and get more into service because we think there's more margin for us in servicing our existing customers. Well, if I actually want to get my initiative through because I'm committed to it and I'm in love with it and I want to see it keep going, then all I need to do is say, this fits into the strategic objective of serving our customers, but we can't do that unless we develop this new app. So there's always a way to shoehorn the things that you're doing to make it look like it's part of your strategic pillars. And everyone disguises this stuff. So it's so common. It's not because people are bad. It's just because people do what they want to do and they see value differently from their perspective than a board or CEO might see from the very top of the organization.
Okay, so let me wind this back to where we started. Hard work can't outpace poor strategy. So can you wrap this up in a nice, neat bow for us, Marty? We need to have a great strategy. We don't want to be working on busy work and the things that aren't moving the needle towards, the value delivery for our organization. How do we make sure that we're not just, working hard, that we have a good strategy and that we should be working with it?
Well, developing the right strategy is the first step, and most organizations don't do that properly. So it's got to be very heavily data-driven. You've got to understand quite intimately who your customers are, what their needs are, and what your performance is to that point in time with any given product. You're normally not talking about brand new products that you're trying to create. You're normally talking about existing products. And when that happens, developing the right strategy is super, super important. So it's not about the PowerPoint decks. It's about understanding the data and knowing intimately what is going to satisfy your customer at the right price and at the right risk level. So that's what you've got to be thinking about all the time. Once you do that and you have something that you're reasonably happy with, and this isn't one shot in the locker, like it's going to take a few passes to get this right. Once you do this, it's really important that you're constantly looking at the horizon because things change all the time. You're not in a static environment. So what's going to happen is that as you change the way you do things strategically, your competitors most likely are going to respond. And you've got to need to know what you're going to do when those competitors do respond and how you fight back. It's not a static environment. There's a lot of moving parts and people respond differently to different stimuli. So have that in mind. And then be serious and diligent about ripping through your work program when you have the opportunity. And that only comes up once a year generally, that you cast your work program, the operating plans and KPIs for the year. When you do that, be ruthless about making sure that you're only doing the things that serve the strategy the way you've designed it and the way it's been approved. Otherwise, you'll just work on all sorts of stuff that isn't helpful. And you know my favorite Peter Drucker quote, which is, the greatest waste of organizational resources is doing really, really well the things that you should not be doing at all.
Oh, that's such a good quote.
Isn't it? He's a master, that guy.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we always like to say is that whatever we're talking about, it needs to be fit for purpose. So strategy is no different. If you're a small business of a couple of people, you need a strategy. If you're a large business, you need a strategy. How can people go about learning strategy without going and doing an MBA?
Yeah, look, I think going and doing an MBA isn't going to help you that much in this regard. Now, look, I respect the MBA qualification enormously. I have one from a high-quality business school. But by the same token, they will teach you the theory of strategy. Practical strategy that you can apply, it's the same as leadership. Yeah, there's so much leadership content and information and knowledge out there, but we have leadership beyond the theory, which is where you take practical steps to change the way you lead. And strategy is no different. So there are some classics that you should read. I think if you're in a smaller business where you're doing quite innovative things, then Clay Christensen's work is must read. The Innovator's Dilemma and the books that follow that. I love Clay. He's dead set genius. And he also produced one of the most interesting podcast episodes I reckon I've listened to in years. It's an oldie. It's the Idea Cast that Harvard Business Review does, and it was called The Jobs to Be Done Theory of Innovation. It's just so clever. So those sorts of things are a little more practical. They just help you to think through what competition is and how you address competition. But I think ultimately you can read a lot of stuff and be none the wiser.
Yeah.
And hiring expensive strategy consultants doesn't quite get you there either, because you're almost outsourcing it. So the first thing is to understand the fundamentals of how strategy drives business performance. And if you can understand business performance, then you're in a position to get going. But then there's a whole thing around terminology. Like, we use terminology that not everyone in the room understands the same thing when we use it.
Yeah.
There's a whole range of things that contribute to great strategy. And if you're in a smaller business where perhaps you're resource constrained, then you've got to know this stuff yourself. You can't just bring in McKinsey and pay them, whatever it is, $250,000 a week to help you get the job done. You've got to work out how to do it yourself. So knowing what to do and how to do it, there's a bunch of stuff, across these podcast episodes, however many episodes we've got, 300-ish, right,
Yep.
so far.
Plus.
And, when we put Strategy Beyond the Theory out, I want it to be to strategy what Leadership Beyond the Theory was to leaders.
Yeah. And if you are interested in getting on the wait list for Strategy Beyond the Theory, you can go to yourceomentor.com/SBT and jump on the wait list there so that you are one of the first to know when we open that program, which is incredibly exciting. All right, Marty, I've loved this episode. Great deep dive. Do you want to do a quick wrap and you can take us out?
Sure, thanks, Em. So we start off with value, right? Value is the centerpiece of everything. So how do you know if you're genuinely delivering value, which is just so important? We spoke about the productivity efficiency multiplier, and I just find that a really good mental frame for thinking about where we are in terms of the ultimate potential that we could achieve. And of course, as we know, excellence over perfection, nothing ever gets to 100%, nothing ever. So don't chase 100%, but just good to know where you are in terms of how effective and efficient are the things that you're doing, and how productive is your team in doing them. Leadership, strategy, that's it. The two things working hand in hand. We spoke about why strategy processes fail in most organizations and the inertia that comes from, having the plans built up on last year's plan and just being built over the top. So you're building on a different foundation than you would ideally do. if you were just working with the strategy and crafting the work program that delivered on that strategy. So we've covered heaps of ground and it's been a heap of fun. Thanks, Em.
Loved it. Thanks so much, Marty.